with that, we will go to our next presenter, to Paul Hamdorf, who is the Interim Executive Director at Islands Oil Spill Association. And so he has spent most of his life near the coast and enjoys many marine-related activities. In 1992, he turned his passion for marine-related activities into a career when he accepted a job with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. He's had several jobs that included pollution response and criminal investigations. He led a team of law enforcement investigators and was the Senate representative for the Los Angeles Long Beach Area Committee. Sounds really interesting. He was also the state representative for the incident-specific preparedness review of the Costco Basin incident. So upon his retirement, he began work for Gallagher Marine Systems as a member of their spill management team. So he lives fairly close by to us here on San Juan Island and remains active on a Gallagher Marine Spill Management team that is approved by Washington State. So thank you very much for your presentation, and we're looking for you, Paul. We've got the presentation up. There you are. There you are. Awesome. So over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon. And it's kind of ironic that you talked about my history in California. I started, some of the first people I worked with was John Tarpley in the OSPR office down in Long Beach. So you never know when friends are going to turn up again. And there's a lot of people I recognize through the day that it would be great to visit with and reminisce. So my immediate goal is to go quickly through a description of what Islands Oil Spill Association is, for those that aren't familiar, and I'm gonna go quick. And all this information is also available on our website, which is actually something we're really proud of. It's up to date, and we take pride in having it be a very good source of information. And then as soon as I get through that, I'm going to talk about where we're at as far as 2022. Next slide. Okay, so we're a nonprofit-based oil spill response organization. We have an executive director. Currently, I'm sitting in that role, and I work for a board of directors. Next slide. There's a lot of information on there, but basically, IOSA has a very interesting past, and we have roots that predate Open 90. And anybody that's familiar with IOSA would know that Julie Knight was our founder and very much just the heart and soul of IOSA for well over 30 years. So we're a long-lasting organization. And again, if you want to take a look at our history, the website's a great source of information. In 2018, IOSA was kind of paused in our ability to respond, and that was due mostly to financial issues, but also some changes in local laws and regulations. But there was still a need locally to have IOSA. So Brendan Cowan, who was our county emergency manager, formed an action team to restart IOSA. And so we worked on that through, I was a member of that team. So if you retire and you know anything about ICS and you go somewhere where people need it, you either keep your mouth shut or you're going to go back to work. So Brendan's a great recruiter. And so I joined that team, and we made a lot of progress. We actually, the county citizens here voted to fund IOSA late in 2019. And then in 2020, we had the same problem as everybody else. We entered into a pandemic time, and it slowed us down a bit. But by 2021, we'd hired Tony Parkin, who came down out of Alaska, a very experienced oil spill responder. And he put us in a really good direction. And unfortunately, in June of this year, he stepped back from the role. Nothing to do with his ability to move us in a great direction, but just personal issues got in the way. So to try to keep that momentum going, I've been sitting in the seat and working to move us forward. Next slide. This has been pretty much covered. I think we're a remote county. Our organization is geared at the county level, and I think that's been kind of beat to death. But the one thing is, we have a very small population. We're dealing 18,000 plus or minus in the 2022 census. which is kind of interesting coming from California or other large states, that it's a very nice scale to work with if you want to see what you did and the reaction to it and the end result. Next slide, please. So our goal is to provide community-based spill response capability for San Juan County. Next slide. Something interesting about our board of directors, I don't know how unique it is, but we're in our bylaws, it's stated that we will have 2 members from county government. Obviously, they support us financially, so it's important that they know what we're doing. And we have 2 members chosen to represent the petroleum industry, who also does a lot to fund us. And the remaining members are chosen to represent the citizens of San Juan County. And that diverse board, I think, is very productive when we're having meetings and ideas, so we get more than just one single perspective. Next slide. This is just, there's no dollar amounts shown, but it shows we get money from a wide variety of sources. A lot comes from the generous citizens of San Juan County who voted to support us. We get a fair amount of government grants, private grants, and also our local refineries and petroleum industry do a lot to fund us as well. Next slide, please. So now I think where we're at moving forward, we're still kind of in a rebuilding mode. The most important things we have is people, equipment, and knowledge. And this is posted all over our website, but I think when we combine the people, equipment, and knowledge, we form an effective, responsive, and locally focused resource just to the islands and the county. You could skip that one. Okay, so our current focus is to outreach to agencies and response partners to share and learn. I think having worked in the oil spill business in one way or another since the early 90s, there's a lot to, you can gain a lot by listening, and you can always learn. I've learned a lot today, and I think I'll take that back to do a better job with my current job. We've also focused on training, and then finally equipment evaluation, maintenance, and ability to deploy rapidly. Sounds pretty simple, just 3 things, but it's actually, it's very, very complicated to get all those things together and be effective. Next slide. Outreach. So before actually I became the executive director or the interim executive director, we had a pretty unique meeting, at least from my standpoint, here on the island. And we had members of the Department of Ecology, the Coast Guard, and not just members, but leaders from each of those organizations come to talk to our county council and to discuss the spill responses in San Juan County. It was a bit foreign to me because when I worked for a state agency, generally, if we were going to meet with elected officials, it wasn't, it was usually to answer questions about something that had gone bad. But this was just like purely planning. So, and I'll get into why I think it was just a very, very timely thing that happened. We also do outreach to local refineries. We attend drills. We invite folks to participate in our trainings. We've been meeting locally with all kinds of different groups, our port in particular, to work together. And we're always inviting folks to join us in drills and training. We want to have friends. And somebody told me a long time ago, the place to build friends is not during a response. Certainly you do, but the more people you know going in, the better you're going to be able to function. Next slide. This is just a photo of us. We got a small boat out, the green heron in the foreground, working with private contractors and a local refinery on an on-water exercise. And then the other photo is our county council. We have 3 county council members that represent the entire voting, all the citizens of this county. And it was very, very helpful to help them understand, you know, unified command and what a large response would look like. And to ask questions and also even get advice from both the Coast Guard and Department of Ecology and how we could prepare to be ready for an oil spill. So our 2022 training, we've had a long history of providing HAZWOPER classes, which is really great. In listening to the people that come to our classes, we found that they enjoy the HAZWOPER, but they're a lot of times looking for a little bit more. So this year we had a wildlife response hands-on training, and then we developed a new class where we did response to marina spills with very little equipment, but what a small group of people might be able to do to help in a marina spill. And we also conducted some boat operations, all in 2022, which is a big accomplishment from an organization that was basically rebuilding. Okay, next slide. So this is example of a typical HAZWOPER course we would give, or another classroom. Can move on. And so as part of that, we've used contractors to teach our classes and put more emphasis on, you know, at least a day of getting out and using equipment, even if it's not out on the water, just understanding what things are and what's in an oil spill response trailer and what it's going to look like if we have to deploy something. Next slide. And this is a kind of a great opportunity to see. We've got somebody from Washington Fish and Wildlife. We've got a bird rescue expert teaching us, and volunteers out actually on the water doing training. So thanks to Barbara and Dan for helping us out. Next. This is one of my favorite pictures from the year. We got a county fire department truck helping tow an IOSA vessel, and we have volunteers. From one is a firefighter, and the rest are IOSA volunteers. So it's just showed we use volunteers a lot, but it's really a community effort. Next. Here's one of our small marina drills or class activities. This took place at a state park. They were gracious enough to open up their facility and support us and host us to do a training. So again, it's just working with everybody in the community. Next. This is another interesting one. We've got the sheriff department represented. There's a firefighter standing in there somewhere and a large group of volunteers. Go to the next one. And then these are the same folks working in a private marina. So you can see it's just involves a lot of folks. Next. This is what our responses typically look like. You know, it's recreational vessels. You can go to the next. Either sunken, hard to ground. You can go to the next. But generally, you know, something's gone wrong. And our role generally is to work with the response agencies coming out to let them know what we see, what we think a proper response would be, and sometimes, you know, take initial actions to help out. So there's been a lot of discussion about the Aleutian Isle. To go back to the presentation that we had from the Coast Guard, from Department of Ecology, with our local elected officials and IOSA, we had a really good idea of what the state and what the Coast Guard expected. So very early in the response, we were working with their watch standards to provide them accurate information. We were able to go out and actually take photos and use some different techniques to provide direct information to the oncoming state on-scene coordinator. And even in the middle of the night, when the first Coast Guard folks showed up, we had IOSA staff out there on the beach with them, which, you know, they could have done the initial size up, but we also had the ability to point them in the right direction, where to get coastal access. And we had already made contact with a lot of our local residents who knew to call IOSA and were asking questions. and giving us information. So we were a good source of information to folks that were coming in through the night, and then the first light to a response. Next. These are some photos we took initially. That's what we were seeing right as the initial, basically shortly after the rescue of the crew had taken place. So the equipment, had a big test of our equipment and our ability to do things with our equipment with the Aleutian Isle. So
Hi, Paul, sorry to interrupt, but you have about 2.5, 3 minutes left.
Okay. Why don't we jump to the next slide? So our role, we had a lot of equipment here, and there was a lot of equipment that's going to need to be staged. So we worked cooperatively to make that equipment available. Go to the next slide. So what you're seeing is it's IOSA maintained and owned boom. We've got a county employee helping deliver that along with IOSA folks to a private contractor. Again, making friends and working together in unified command. Next. And you can go to the next. So we staged trailers around the island. There are some places where it's pretty tight to get in and out of, but we put our boom in places where it could be used immediately. And sometimes it sat for days, but ultimately a lot of it was deployed. Next. This is, we heard about the whale deterrence devices. You're seeing part of them. We actually housed a lot of that equipment and got some pretty frantic calls. Can we get it? Where is it? We found it. We brought it to the folks that needed to get it. Next. That's more of the Okumi pipes, basically in my front yard. Ironically, within a couple of hours of setting it there, Dave Byers, who was the SOSC, drove up and picked them up. So it was pretty funny. I talked to him on the phone the night before, I believe, and then he was down moving equipment with us. Next. And now we're in the process of putting our equipment back and evaluating what's the best way that if we had to do this again, we would approach it. Next. And I put this in real quick. This is my office. And then next. And our shameless plug that we are hiring an executive director. We're looking for somebody that would be interested in working in the community. And if you have any questions, the next slide has got all my contact info.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Paul. This is another opportunity for me to say and to write down on my notes here as I'm listening. Wow, what a great program. What an incredible opportunity for volunteers in the community to have a role. And I'm sure this is the type of program that a lot of people are listening to and watching and thinking, wow, I wish we could have that. So are there any questions in the chat, in the Q&A there, Meg?
Yeah, Kelly, there's one from Greg Bowie. Is your equipment listed in the Worldwide Response Resources List, WRRL?
It is. And one of the things, it's kind of a test of our, I'm not new to oil spills, but I'm new to this type of oil spill response. And I hadn't even been the executive director for, it was going on my 3rd month before this occurred. So I was able to, we have volunteers that actually train on how to enter our equipment into the whirl. I was able to find everything that we needed, like in just a few minutes, not from the whirl, but from the people who input the information. And then we were able to, in real time, at the end of each day, I was able to call over to the guy who was inputting it, and he was updating the whirl in real time. So that we're finding ways, like we don't have to be out in front, actually always cleaning up the oil or things that people think of when they think of oil spills response, but it's all the little things mean a lot. Like we do know where to go find our equipment. We do know how to get access for responders. So that's where we're trying to not compete with response organizations, but enhance them.
We do have a question for Paul from John Harper. How does IOSA handle liability insurance during a spill event or even a training session?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Well, I think Dan brought it up as well. It's a very tricky issue for us. And so we actually have to use a different insurance when we have people doing regular maintenance of equipment. And then we're in a whole different arena when we put folks on the water. So it's, we're working on that as we speak. And we've tackled it a couple different ways. One is sort of using a model of what a search and rescue team would use, that type of insurance through the state, but it's very limited in scope and we have to define what we're going to do. So it's a challenge. I think it's a challenge for anybody that's not a government agency to deal with it. And you know, we're working on it. And if anybody has any great ideas, we'd love to hear it, because it doesn't seem, if you do it privately, it does nonprofit, unless you're very, very well funded, you can't survive doing it privately. You know, insuring volunteers through a private policy.
You're muted, Meg.
Thanks. Paul, there was a question earlier in the chat too that was directed to Don Noviello, but perhaps I'll give you a chance with IOSA to answer it too. It was a reflection by Barbara Callahan about just the challenge of getting out to the islands for folks, you know, whether it's from ecology headquarters or anywhere on the mainland, and the use of private vessels. Don touched on vessels of opportunity, but what does that look like for your work? I guess just more broadly, the island working together to address this as a remote location.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be remote, so that we can't change that. And our ferry system is going through their own struggles, and it's a tough time. It does make our job more, I guess, maybe more meaningful, in that if we can, there's as many things as we can do to like provide equipment, have it staged. And so if we don't have to bring all the equipment over, we can just bring the people who are going to use the equipment over. That's a little less of a challenge. And I think the after action reports that are going to take place will address a lot of that, but it does sort of validate what we're doing, is keeping equipment and keeping people local knowledge, so they know what's most important to bring here. And so be able to use that. The vessels of opportunity, that's something that's beyond IOSA. So if they were, you know, vessels of opportunity, that comes in through the state, and it's a different insured, you know, way of doing business. But it's tough. I mean, and again, that's why we do our best to help be prepared and you know, lessen that curve of getting folks out there.
Thanks, Paul.